So chopping a sample is one of the easiest ways to take any sound and turn it into something completely different. But it's not even my favorite way to flip a sample. There's a whole world of sampling techniques beyond that, and today we're going to rank all of the ones that I use, from the foundational things like chopping, or taking a sample and putting it into tinier slices, to the more weird and out there like granular, where you take a sound and tiny grains of its audio are transformed into something completely new. And there's no better place to start than pitch and time stretch. Pitching is exactly what it sounds like. You take a sample and you change the pitch or note value of what's in it. Now, when you pitch a sample, as you can tell, it changes the speed as well. It's not just changing the note. Moving the pitch makes it shorter if you speed it up and longer if you slow it down. But time stretch, which some samplers have and pretty much any DAW has, adds another bit of complexity to it. If we take a sample like these drums without time stretch, or warp as some call it, it will do that typical change the speed when we change the pitch. But if we enable time stretch, what's going to happen is no matter what pitch we set it to, it's going to stay that speed of the BPM we set. Now, you can hear a lot of artifacting happens when you do that because it's time stretching. It's stretching the time to fit whatever BPM that we've set. And because of that, you can get some really great sounding graininess and lo-fi sound to it just from this. You can also transpose or put a single sample across the full keyboard. So we can take this sample, that's a piano chord, so we can make a whole chord progression just from this single chord. And that's why I love this more than chopping. We could take any sort of sound and move it across a keyboard and have a full instrument. So pitch and time stretch is going to go in the S tier for me, because if there was only one sample technique I'd use, it would be that. The ability to create my own instruments and just make any sort of sound is awesome. With sampling techniques, it is best if you stack them, put multiple on top of the other. But if I had to put it to just the most basic, which sampling technique would I keep, it would be pitch and time stretch. So that brings us over to chopping. Now, as we discussed at the start, chopping is taking a longer sample, or any sample, and slicing it or chopping it into smaller sections. And we've got a whole new drum idea. You're just isolating it into smaller sections. And this works for chords as well. If you've got a chord progression like this, chop it up, and now what it might have sounded like at the start does not have to be what it sounds like anymore. We could do a whole new section. But that's the magic of chopping. It gives you control over a sample in ways you couldn't with any other technique we're going to use. There's also something with chopping I really love, is the micro timing. Whatever sample you're using, the BPM of that may be different from the BPM you're recording in. So you get all sorts of unintentional grooves and shuffles because what would be the tempo of the original sample is clashed or contrasted with your current tempo. And that's why I think chopping is essential. I just don't think it's the most transformative technique for me. I just like that with pitching, I could take any tiny sound, a fraction of a section of a sample, and turn that into bass lines, chords. So chopping is A tier, extremely important, and probably the first sampling technique I would recommend anyone new to sampling use, because it's just so foundational. But for me, it just sits right below pitch and time stretch. And with whatever form of sampling you use, your original sound source matters a lot, because chopping only works if the sample gives you something worth reacting to. And this video is sponsored by TrackLib, a platform for discovering, sampling, and legally licensing music. It feels much closer to digging through records than just scrolling through sample packs and loop libraries. You're searching through real songs from all years and genres, and when you find something inspiring to chop up, you can pitch it, loop it, or even work from the stems all within TrackLib, so you can get an idea of where you might want to go with it, and then export that to your sampler or DAW. And there's even stems available for some songs, so if you only want just that vocal stab, it's there. For all the examples in this video, every sample I'm using comes from TrackLib, and I ended up finding some pretty useful sources that I probably wouldn't have come across otherwise, because I don't have to worry about copyright issues when using the samples. If you decide to release the song, TrackLib makes it very easy to legally license a sample right from TrackLib. So there's no wondering how you're going to clear a sample, because they do it for you. If you want to check it out, I've got a link in the description. Thanks again to TrackLib for sponsoring the video. All right, so now we got to talk about one-shots. Now this is a little bit of an extension of chopping, but I'm going to treat it as its own just because of how important it is to beat making and how transformative it is. So this is when you take an isolated sound like a kick, a hi-hat, a snare, a piano note, and just place it exactly where you want it on the sequencer. And this is not flashy at all, but it is incredibly useful because now we can make whatever kind of drum pattern we want. One-shots can be done in two main ways. An isolated note or hit of something, like a couple weeks ago when I was in Hawaii, I got isolated sounds of a coconut, bamboo hitting a rock, and those became one-shots of a kick and a snare. And the other way is to trim a longer sample and isolate single sounds and then move those to individual pads. So this is one of the best ways to create your own drum kits and patterns, but it can also work for vocal effects or risers, transitions, anything like that. So I'm going to put this one in the A tier because it's fast, practical, and incredibly foundational to any sort of beat you want to make. It might not always be the most exciting, but it is usually one of the most useful ways to flip a sample. Now we're getting into some interesting stuff like effects manipulation. This is using effects, things like reverbs, clippers, to fundamentally change the character of a sample rather than just polish it. So a simple drum loop like this can become something a lot grittier with a lot more punch if we add some effects. So let's go and we're gonna add a vintage emulator, which is set to the SP1200 ring, which is basically a ring mod or a bit crush, as you'll hear. And then we'll also go into the pad effects, add this color, maybe just a little reverb. Hear how much noise we got, and it's so compressed, just a massive amount. The reverb's excessive. I probably wouldn't use that, but just to give you an example, we really added some character to that drum loop that was, without it, I mean, it's just... So I'm gonna put this in the B tier, and that's because effects can enhance the sample, but without things like chop or resample, they just don't always do enough for what I would want. Usually when I hear a sample, there's something I want to extract from it rather than the original source. There's a small segment or a new pattern I hear that gets me out of the way I would normally write a chord progression. So if you're just adding effects, it's doing a little bit of that because you're putting your own flavor on top of the sample. It's like adding salt and pepper or something to a dish. But when you start chopping and stuff, you're following your own recipe and making something your own. But that does get us over to resampling. Now, resampling is a very interesting method because it means you can record whatever sounds you have in your sampler or DAW and re-record them with the effects you've baked in. So I have this loop, and if we were to take that and resample it to an empty pad, we can change the sample rate. So rather than being as clean as it originally sounds, we can really grit up the sample rate. So it's going to sound really distorted. And we can also add maybe something like isolator to take out all the low end and the high end. And then when we hit play, it's going to record this. Now check this out. If we have our original sound, this was the original sample. Hear all that high end grain and bit crush? That is from the sample rate change. And then we took out all that low end and high end with the isolator. So something like that, we could start the song with this really gritted up version. And then bring the song in properly. Resampling is awesome because you can just take something and add all those effects, but then you're not stuck with those effects on, right? One of the issues we had with that MPC setup we just did in the previous section is that all those effects on the pad effects are going to treat every sound being played in the loop that we've set or the pattern that we've set, because pad effects is at the end of the routing on the MPC. But if we were to just resample those sounds, then we'd have all of that baked into a pad and we wouldn't have to be using all of these effects on everything. Now, the reason I'm gonna put this in the B tier is because resampling is cool on its own, but it really comes alive when you combine it with other sampling techniques. A lot of the rankings we're doing start with what is most useful on its own, and then how does it work when combined with other techniques? A lot of sampling is finding ways to work everything together, but I do want to talk about each one as they stand on their own. So resampling is great if you just want to quickly save effect space or voices on limited samplers and things like that. But it really comes alive if you were to take this, right? And if we were to then chop it, put some drums on top of that maybe. See how we have a completely different song now? Nothing like that original. If we were to repitch it as well, let's do that and get back to that. totally different sound from that original one. And that's why I love sampling, right? Like, that's what's so cool about sampling. You can extract these ideas you hear in a sample and make something completely new with it. Next up is looping. Now this one's pretty simple. Take a section of audio and repeat it continuously as the foundation of a track. And if we've created a perfect start and end point to it, it just keeps looping continuously. And now we have a song playing. Now looping is probably the simplest technique on this list, and it works. Find the right section of a sample, loop it, build it, and you've got the track. That's it. The downside is that it's not always fun creatively, at least for me. It can feel a little passive, like you're just curating sounds almost. So looping for me is going to be B tier. It's simple, effective, and completely dependent on choosing the right samples. All right, so next up is layering. Now this is really essential with something like one-shots because we have that snare and we have that snare, right? But if we were to layer those together, there's two sounds. But if we set this one with offset, hear that? It thickens up that snare, right? This works really well with drums because if you have kicks, think of something like have a very subby kick, like low end kick, and then a really clicky kick, and you can combine those. Layering is easy to overdo, and it also is time consuming. It can work, but sometimes just finding the best original source, like a really solid kick sound instead of merging 4 kicks together, saves a lot of time and also just a lot of hassle that maybe not worth it. So I like layering, I use it, I find it's really powerful, but it's just easy to overdo and spend a little too much time on. So this is going in the C tier. So reversing is exactly what it sounds like, reversing a sample. We've got this piano, let's reverse this. That sounds pretty cool, right? But if you wanted to use this melodically or something, I think it really is most useful if you were to either chop up a sound you reversed or put it across the keyboard. Now we've got this whole groove going on. That's why I'm gonna put reverse in the C tier. It can be useful. It's not something I often go for, but when I do use it, I always want to combine it with other things. All right, now we're getting to the even weirder stuff, and this is granular. So granular is breaking a sound down into tiny fragments called grains, and then you reassemble them in ways that can sound completely alien to the original sound source. I have this vocal sample. That was pretty cool. But if we check, just to show you that this is the sample, if we hold pattern granular, you'll see which one we have set for the granular engine on the P6, and it's this sample. So this is what I turned it into. You can probably hear the original source coming through there, but if I were to play this across the keyboard, it's not the best sounding. If we were to do that with the granular, now we've got something. The thing with granular is it's very interesting. It can be used for a lot. I'm barely scratching the surface with how I made this setting. And because of that, it's a very complex beast. I find it's really useful for experimental sound design, drones, and I do like that side of it. But a lot of time, granular to me just kind of sounds like delay with extra steps. In a beat making context, with all of that complexity and how long it can take to find a sound, it's not something I'm usually going to take the time doing. It can be worth it, like this one, but oftentimes it can get really chaotic unless you really change the speed of the grains and how they're moving and making sure it's not moving too far through the sample. It's just more situational for me and not something I'm going to use often. So granular, it's going to go in the D tier. The last thing I want to talk about, it's kind of a sampling technique, but it's also kind of an effect, but I'm going to count it as sampling because it is taking a sound and looping it to a degree, but it's slicing and a stutter. Something like the DJ effects looper. Hear how it's just looping and constantly stuck? You can do cool things like change the pitch and change the speed. It's really fun to just play a song and do something over the pattern you've set, and this is an easy way to do something over the pattern. It's really easy to do on the P6 and the SP, and even on the MPC. It's fine. Again, maybe not fully a sampling technique, but it is doing something where it's taking audio and causing it to repeat, so it is some form of sampling, even if it's like on a micro scale. So I did want to include it, and I'm going to put it in the F tier because it's just really actually not that useful, and it is pretty overplayed and overdone. And at the end of the day, it's not about knowing every technique or even using every technique. It's about knowing which ones actually work to inspire us to create music. And for me, that's pitching, chopping, and definitely a bit of resampling. And as I keep saying, every technique works better when combined and used in a system rather than treated as a single method. This is just a fun exercise to look at every sampling technique I use and see which ones actually are useful, which ones really depend on other techniques to be useful, and which ones are just overdone or too complicated and really not worth it. And obviously, this is just how I rank these for my workflow. If your list is completely different, drop it in the comments because I'm curious to hear what is your top technique and if it's different from mine. And if you want to see how I solve my biggest problem with samplers and hardware, check out this video next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.